Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades, compañeros, welcome to the Moynihan Report. A rather grim day today, considering the grim news from yesterday of the political commentator Charlie Kirk, 31 years old, with two very young children, was murdered at a political rally at a university. And I just wanted to say at the top of this, I've been talking about this on this show, in other shows, that we are living in an era of hideous political violence. Charlie Kirk murdered, and we don't have to look too much further back to see frequent examples of this. Almost totally forgotten about two young people who worked for the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., coming out of an event there, were murdered by a psychotic terrorist. A woman also totally forgotten about in Colorado. And another attack on American Jews was killed when a terrorist was throwing Molotov cocktails at a crowd. Another Jewish man killed during a rally in California. He was beaten till he was unconscious and he died. Let's not forget the members of the Minnesota State Assembly that were killed not too long ago. And the President of the United States was shot. We even forget about that. So it's a hideous time in American history. It reminds us of the period of the late 60s, early 70s, when the Weather Underground and similar groups were ascendant and killing people for political purposes. But today I want to ask our guest about that and many other things. We're very lucky to have Professor Alan Dershowitz, actually one of those people that literally needs no introduction, but he's an emeritus professor at Harvard Law School. He's written a billion books. I have most of them. And you see him around, but we have him here today to talk about a bunch of things. But I wanted to start by asking Professor Dershowitz about the news of yesterday and what he makes about it, and what he makes as somebody who advocates for Israel and talks a lot about issues regarding the Jewish people and the attacks on Jews, ending in the deaths, as I just recounted, of many in the United States. What he makes of that news that we got yesterday. Professor Dershowitz, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It really a sad and dangerous day. I speak on college campuses all over the world, and I've had to have glass shields, bulletproof shields, put in front of me to protect me from threatened death at places like the University of Toronto because of my pro-Israel advocacy. I'm going to be speaking at Harvard in the next week. I just saw a poll on CNN. I have a shirt that says, "Is it true?" Do you hear it on CNN? So I have my doubt about CNN accuracy. But there was a poll shown by CNN that more than a majority of college students today believe that violence is an appropriate answer to bad speech. They don't believe in the First Amendment, and they think that it's okay to respond to free speech with violence. It's a matter of degree. I live for the summer on Martha's Vineyard, where people simply don't talk to me because I defended Donald Trump. They won't engage with me. They won't argue with me. They simply ignore me. I went to dinner last night, and there was a woman at the next table named Rose Styron, the widow of the famous author Styron. I've been friends for 50. I said hello to her. She just ignored me. And that's typical of what goes on in places like Martha's Vineyard, where the hard left simply doesn't want to speak to what they believe anybody who's centrist or liberal or conservative and isn't hard left. And the same thing happened to me with Caroline Kennedy. I was at a dinner party and she was seated next to me. And she said to me, "If I knew you were coming, I would never have agreed to come to a dinner party with Alan Dershowitz because you defended Donald Trump." I said, "But I also defended Ted Kennedy. And I also defended Bill Clinton." Well, that's not good enough. If you defended Donald Trump, you're on the wrong side of history. You're Hitler's accomplice. And we're going to treat you like Hitler's accomplice. So, free speech is dead. I don't think you could have the Lincoln Douglas debates at Harvard today. Half the students would say, "We don't want to hear," and half the students would say, "We don't want to hear Douglas." And some would probably go and get some guns. So I'm very concerned about the future of debate, dialogue, and free speech in America. And thank God for programs and podcasts like yours, which promote free speech. You and I don't agree about everything, obviously, but you're willing to have me express my points of view and debate. And that's what, of course, Charlie Kirk was doing when he was killed. He was in the process of saying to students, prove me wrong. Let's have a debate. Let's have a dialogue. You and I disagree about transgender issues. Okay, let's have it out. Let the truth prevail in the marketplace of ideas, but the marketplace of ideas is dying a slow death. And the major villains are American faculty members at schools like Harvard and Columbia and Princeton, at Yale and Stanford. These academic thugs are teaching their students to dismiss views that they don't agree with without taking them on. They would have been among the group that killed Socrates back in ancient Athens. The tradition of just not allowing free speech is so dominant today on the hard left and in academia that it has turned American universities into left-wing propaganda mills. Harvard is now a mediocre university, a mediocre university. It used to be a great place of learning. Today, particularly in the social sciences and the political aspects of the school, its slogan should not be Veritas Truth. It should be meritocratus, mediocrity. What's happened?
You know, and I will point out that my friends over at FIRE, the great Greg Lukianoff,
Yep.
and the people who do studies over there, last year when they did this, Harvard ranked first. And did it rank first as being the greatest university in America? No, the ranked first in violations of free speech. Number one was Harvard University. Absolutely astonishing. But Professor Dershowitz, you've been around for a while. I mean that in the most generous way, Professor. But you've been around for a while. Tell me how this has changed over time. I mean, you've seen these debates. You saw the tumult of the 1960s on the campus of Harvard and many other campuses. You saw the splintering into these violent factions, both in Europe with the Baader-Meinhof group and here with Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground and various other schismatic, crazy people. But it seemed, you know, when you were defending Bill Clinton, you wrote a book called Sexual McCarthyism back in the 90s, that time you had spasms of violence. You would have something like the Oklahoma City atrocity, but it seemed like we were in a better place when it came to speech, when it came to a better place to disagreeing with our political opponents. If you went on campus, if David Horowitz went on campus, there'd be a bunch of protests. I remember this very well when I was in school. But you never thought this to be a threat of violence. What changed during those times? And I mean, do you think this is redolent of those times in the 1960s, which did end in a kind of mass psychosis?
Well, it's the fault of people like Barack Obama, who befriended people like Ayers, who were blowing up buildings. It's the fault of Columbia University, which hired Kathy Boudin, a woman who was convicted of murdering policemen. And as soon as she was pardoned, she was hired to teach students. It was the glorification of the violence of the 60s. Now, I defended some people who were accused of free speech violations in the 60s, but I never glorified the violence. And what's happened is the Barack Obamas and others glorified the violence, befriended the violence doers, made them legitimate, and sent a message to people on both sides of the political spectrum that, hey, you know, it's kind of cool to be a little violent, to go to jail, maybe to kill somebody. And I think we're seeing the consequences of that, both on the extreme hard right and the hard left. But let me be very clear. The left is much more dangerous than the right. Why is the left more dangerous than the right? Because the right has no resonance on university campuses. They have no impact on our students. It's the left that has impact on our students. And if you want to know what this country will look like 15 or 20 years from now, look at the student bodies and look at the faculties today. And it's a dreadfully frightening, scary scenario with the left, with people like Mamdani becoming mayor of New York, which is likely to happen. There is no such danger from the right. Yes, there are people on the right who shoot. There are people on the right who blow up synagogues. But there's nobody on the right who gets an audience on a university campus. Only the hard left get university campus audiences. And when you see these polls that show that so many students are in favor of violence, who do you think these students are? These are students on the hard left that glorify Antifa, which is a violent organization called anti-fascist that tries to stop people like me from speaking on college campuses because I'm a moderate supporter of Israel and Zionism, and so I'm an appropriate target. It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better because universities aren't getting any better. I have to give a lot of credit to President Trump. I'm critical of some of the things he's done. I think he's pushed too hard on cutting off research, medical research, scientific research, but he surely has sent a message to universities that the American people will not tolerate using universities and taxpayer funds to create generations of students who hate America, hate Judaism, hate Judeo-Christianity, hate everything that America stands for, hate free market economy. No, that's not the role of the university. And if you look at who are on university faculties, it's 90 what? Some people say 7%, some people say 3%. Nobody puts the number under 90% of leftist teachers, many of whom believe it's their proper role to propagandize students in the classroom. And we're seeing it every day.
I make one addendum to something you said about Columbia at Teachers College, which hired Kathy Boudin, and I'm sure you knew her father, Leonard Boudin, who was a famous lawyer, defended people on the far left who were accused of, various terrorist crimes, and of course his daughter is then accused of the same thing, goes to prison. But there were, I think, two other. I wrote a piece about this for the Daily Beast a long time. I think there were two other people involved in the Nyack robbery. Which, incidentally, the anti-fascists of the Nyack robbery killed the first black policeman on the Nyack police force, a guy named Waverly Brown, who's forgotten about. Right. But two others that I know that were on the faculty, and I think one of whom remains on the faculty at Columbia. And I wrote a piece about this, that it provided you're killing for the right purposes, the right reasons, if you were in the Black Panthers, then it was okay. But, as you say, we don't want to forget about the right in this, because particularly as somebody who is Jewish and who writes about Israel, has written a number of books about it, the Tree of Life massacre, various, Nazi far-right people, again, you're right, they're outside of the university. But I wanted to ask you about within the conservative coalition, I see a lot of very disturbing trends of people, as you clearly have noted, that not only are moving away from Israel, but are, embracing people like Nick Fuentes, who is just an out-and-out fascist. I mean, Tucker Carlson, who's been, engaging with people like Darryl Cooper, who seems to be somebody who plays footsie with Nazis, if not something a little more than that. What do you make of the trends on the right, too, towards, moving away from support for Israel, number one, and doing it in kind of what I would say is a kind of anti-Semitic protocols of the Elders of Zion way, that this is a vast, conspiracy, and that these people are loyal to a foreign government. They should be filing under FARA, like all this stuff. There's a lot of this on the right, whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson.
Well, it started, of course, with Pat Buchanan, who was an out anti-Semite, and Bill Buckley deserved the Medal of Freedom for no other reason than for being a conservative right-wing commentator who exposed Bill Buckley and said what he has said and done amounts to anti-Semitism. And during the time when Bill Buckley, who was a friend of mine, was alive, there was no anti-Semitism being mainstreamed by the right. But once Bill died, and Tucker Carlson basically converted. I was on Tucker Carlson's show many times when he was on Fox. We would disagree about immigration. We would disagree about other issues. We were perfectly compatible, and we had good arguments. And he seemed to support my views on Israel. And then I think he decided that there are two explanations. One, that he found a niche for himself that he thought he could fill and could help him be more popular and make money, and that is turn against Israel. Or maybe he was always that way and he had hidden it to be on Fox, and now he was free of Fox, so he was free of the constraints. In either event, Tucker Carlson has become an evil, evil man and an evil source of bigotry against not only the Jewish community, but basically the Judeo-Christian tradition and many of the most important values of America. And he takes with him just a handful of people from the extreme right who follow in his footsteps. So the numbers just aren't there. Now, if you go on the internet and TikTok and all of that, the numbers are there. And so all you need is a few Tucker Carlsons and a few Marjorie Taylor Greenes to bring out the people from under the rocks. But they're there. And look, Jews have always historically been caught between the black and the red, the black of fascism and the red of communism. And when you think of what happened in the 30s, Stalin was killing Jews because they were too far left, and Hitler was killing Jews, and I'm sorry, I got the reverse. Stalin
Yeah.
was killing Jews because they weren't left enough, and Hitler was killing Jews because they were too far left. So when you get extremes, whether it be Stalin and Hitler or whether it be Antifa today and the hard right, you're going to get one of the first manifestations is going to be scapegoating, and who is the scapegoat historically of the world, namely the Jewish people.
Well, it brings me to another subject that you know well, you've been involved in, and you've been sort of wrapped up in for a very long time. And I see it being brought up, and we did an episode on the show about the kind of myths that have overwhelmed so many people. I mean, I'm talking about mainstream people, not even the crackpots that have really gone in hard on this, on the Epstein stuff. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself in 2019. Or people say he was murdered. He killed himself, I think, in 2019. And this rears its ugly head again 6 years later. And I think there was actually a very good piece. I was surprised. I read this morning. I think it's Matthew Schmitz was his name, in the Catholic magazine First Things. And because it was really terrific, and said there's so much nonsense and BS around this. And he compared it to the protocols and this kind of idea of a blood libel. I learned something in that, and I wanted to put this to you because you've been, a part of this case in so many ways. Is there was a witness in this case, one of the earliest ones, named Maria Farmer. I believe her name is Maria Farmer. And she was quoted in this piece giving an interview, and I looked this up and made sure that this was true, and it turned out to be true, that she said, well, every Jew that I've ever known is a pedophile. Something to that effect, this larger pedophilic conspiracy of Jews. And that is, of course, the thing that, why does Daryl Cooper go on to Tucker Carlson's show to talk about the Epstein case? Why is it constantly that Jeffrey Epstein is accused of being an asset of Israeli intelligence? And my favorite thing about that was that they wanted to get goods on people like Alan Dershowitz, because you had to convince Alan Dershowitz to be pro-Israel. This doesn't even make any sense anymore. But I got a number of questions about that. But why do you think that this case came up and is consuming kind of the Republican Party more than anyone right now? Democrats are very wisely sitting back and watching this sort of implosion. But when you see this stuff about, and you knew Jeffrey Epstein, we can discuss that too, but when you look at this as a large pedophile ring in which the Israeli intelligence service, this stuff is mainstream. I'm not, just as we say, picking the crazy people that are talking about this, that the Israeli intelligence has stuff on Bill Clinton, it has stuff on Ehud Barak, it has stuff on you, it has stuff on everyone. And Jeffrey Epstein is the linchpin of this, and we need the files. What do you attribute this kind of new resuscitation of the Jeffrey Epstein story, which is a horrifying story in a million ways, but this seems to me very much the wrong story to be telling.
Of course, it's the protocols of the elders of Zion all over again. Jews are pedophiles, and they all are together, and they work together in a pedophilic ring. Of course, I actually was a lawyer for the Mossad. They retained me free of charge 20 years ago when 5 Mossad agents were captured in Cyprus and were thought to have been working for Turkey. They weren't. They were working for Israel. I engaged in my legal procedures, and I got them out just in time for them to celebrate the Jewish New Year. And I got a lovely letter from the head of the Mossad thanking me for doing this. And in the letter, he says, we all hope someday an organization like ours will never be necessary. But unfortunately, today it is. So I have very good sources within Israeli intelligence. I have been a close friend of Benjamin Netanyahu since 1970. We're talking about 65 years. I went to Israel recently. I put the question directly to all of the major figures, and they all categorically did 2 things. They laughed hysterically. Why would any reasonable intelligence agency want to get involved with Jeffrey Epstein? And then, of course, they denied it. But then one of the major networks came up with a picture. Wow, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It was a picture of Jeffrey Epstein wearing an IDF T-shirt, and that proved everything, except for the fact that I bought him that T-shirt. for $7.98 in the shuk. And because I know he loved Israel, and he loved Israeli military, so I bought him the T-shirt. When I went back to Israel, I went and bought another T-shirt. It was at that point $9.99, but you could still get for less than $10 a T-shirt which identifies you as a member of the IDF. So, the absurdity of these arguments is bizarre. Let me tell you the absolute truth about Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein was a pervert who liked young girls, no question, and he was extremely selfish. So what he would do is he would send some young girls out to what were called whack shacks. I had never heard the term before, in West Palm Beach, where young sex workers would give hand jobs to older men for $50 or $60, and he would hire them for $200 to give him a sexually oriented massage. That was it. There's only one person who has ever said that he then sent her out to Prince Andrew, to other people, but there's no hard information about any kind of widespread, conspiracy involving Bill Clinton. I mean, there was a woman named Sarah Ransom, for example. She said, and she called the New York Post, and she said to them, she sent them 100 emails. I have copies of them because I was one of the lawyers. She said she had proof that Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Richard Branson, and Donald Trump all had sex on videotape with minors, and she has those tapes, and she sent them to the Soviet Union, to Russia, for safekeeping. Eventually, she had to admit she made up the whole story. But when these congressional committees release it, they just release the accusation. Take, for example, Maria Farmer. She was on CNN as a credible witness. She was in front of Congress as a credible witness. And yet she is an overt anti-Semite. She claimed she saw me walking up the steps of Jeffrey Epstein's house once, a year before I ever met Jeffrey Epstein. So she had no credibility with that accusation at all, but CNN put her on without putting on the contrary information. Congressional committees have believed her testimony. And so that's why right from the beginning, I've wanted everything to come out. By everything, I mean including not only the accusations, but the information that might show that some of the accusations were false, and many of the accusations were false. And so a lot has been made of Jeffrey Epstein. I think he fits a lot of stereotypes, and people love stereotypes, but the story is way, way overblown. Just now, we've seen the British ambassador to the United States lose his job because he wrote an email saying that he thought Jeffrey Epstein had been unfairly treated, and he lost his job as a result of that. I don't know of any person in modern history who's dead has had such an impact on so many living people as Jeffrey Epstein. But there it is, and you have to ask yourself why, and why the Republicans. You can understand the political benefits that the Democrats are getting, but why would the Republicans be attacking Donald Trump and Pam Bondi on this issue? I don't get it.
Was it Virginia? Was it Roberts? Jeffria? I was it less Jeffria or Roberts? I guess is the maiden name.
The maiden name Roberts. Her married name was Giuffre, and she committed a few months ago. Me and then retracted it and said that
you sued her, right, for the accusations, right?
I said she may have confused me with somebody else. In other words, a case of complete misidentification. So she dropped all of her claims against me, and so, in my view, at least, I've been completely and totally cleared of any false charges. And the media has generally treated that fairly and understood that I never had sex with anybody but my wife since the day I met Jeffrey Epstein, as I swore under oath. I think people believe that now.
And she is, just to be clear, she is the person, and the only person, as far as I can tell, who has made the claim that there was a vast ring of people being sort of, pushed to Prince Andrew and you and other people. Is she the only person, or is there anyone else?
Yeah, no, she's the only person, as far as I know, except for that Ransom woman who admitted she made up the whole story. But she accused Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, She accused Bill Richardson, the former ambassador to the UN. She accused the man who invented artificial intelligence, Marvin Minsky. She accused, I would say about a dozen, a psychology professor at Harvard and some other people, and produced no evidence of any of that. And her friends have said that she just went through the Rolodex and figured out the names of prominent people and named them. I'm precluded from, under the agreement that I've made with her lawyers, from going into details about her allegations, except you can find them all in the public sphere. But as far as I know, only she and Ransom were the ones who, and Ransom admitted she was wrong, and she admitted she may have been mistaken about me. But other than those two, I don't know of anybody who's actually said that he trafficked people to other prominent people. And we know from the records there's no allegations really against Donald Trump or against Bill Clinton or against any other prominent people. So I think people are just searching for something, but there's nothing there at the end.
Alan, you were Epstein's lawyer.
Yeah.
You've been a lawyer. I mean, you said something when it came to OJ that had the Goldman family called you first, you would have represented them. That's what you do. You represent people who need representation. But you were also friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Why? Why would knowing him as the way that you did and all the stuff that had come out by 2006, 7, 8 around the first prosecution of him and the Alex Acosta business, why were you friends with him? What was it about him?
I was never friends with him after that. Here's the story. I'm sitting on Martha's Vineyard. It's August of 1996, a month before Leslie Wexner's 59th birthday. That's how I can date it. I get a call from a woman named Lynn Forrester. She eventually became Lady Rothschild, yes. Married Ethan Rothschild, one of the stupidest men I've ever met in my life. And she's married to him, and she gives a big party on the vineyard. But before that, she calls me and says, "My dearest friend, Jeffrey Epstein, is coming to Martha's Vineyard to visit me, and he loves meeting smart people, and he's asked to meet with you. Would you meet with him?" And I said, "No, my kids are here. I don't want to really take time from my kids. Please, you have to do me a favor. He's just donated $50 million to Harvard." That wasn't true. And you really have to meet with him. So I said, all right, I'll do a half an hour. So I met with him. And then he invited me to Leslie Wexner's birthday party, saying he always gave Leslie Wexner as a present the smartest person he met that year, and introduced him. And he said, I was the smartest person that met. So I went to the dinner. Who was at the dinner? Shimon Peres, the former prime minister of Israel, John Glenn, the astronaut senator, the man who owned Sotheby's. There was 6 men at the dinner other than Epstein and Wexner. And it was a fun dinner at his house. In front of all these great Picassos from the Blue Period, which Wexner had collected. And so I maintained an academic relationship primarily with Epstein between, say, 1996 and the day he called me to represent him. The day he called me to represent him, my friendship ended, and I became like his doctor. I was his lawyer. I had been giving him legal advice before that as well, but we had an academic acquaintanceship. He would have these seminars at Harvard. For example, one day he sat me next to a guy named Church who had decoded the genome. He had been on the Harvard faculty with me for 25 years. I'd never met him, but Epstein introduced me. At the same dinner was Stephen Jay Gould, Steve Pinker, some of the great intellectuals. And so Jeffrey had this ability to bring these people together. The president of Harvard, the provost of Harvard. I don't think any of us had any idea of what he was doing in the private parts of his apartment. But so we were acquaintances. And on his 50th birthday, Ghislaine Maxwell asked all of us to do a birthday book for him. And so there had just been an article in Vanity Fair, which had been somewhat critical. In fact, he had asked me to give him legal advice on the Vanity Fair article. And so I sent him a little note where I mocked up the cover, making it vanity unfair. That's what you do. But once he was accused of having sex with any underage girl, I never renewed my friendship with him at all. And I don't think very many people did. Now, some people did. We know that there are some prominent people who maintained a friendship with him after he was indicted, but many, many, many terminated their friendship at that point.
I mean, it is actually seems to me as simple as this. I mean, very, very wealthy people can assemble a very impressive group of friends based mostly on their wealth, right? I mean, that they can connect people that way. It seems to be what happened with Epstein, right?
I think so. I mean, uh, he had many houses. He had a house in New Mexico. He had a house in London. He had a house on the island. He had a house in New York. And he would invite people to seminars, intellectual seminars in these various locations. And yes, and he was charming. He was funny and he was charming and he was witty. He served good food. He served good wine. He didn't himself drink or eat much, but he would gather all these people together, and we would have these intellectual seminars, and they were interesting. And they terminated, obviously, once he was indicted.
Yeah, I've met a number of people who knew him in New York City, where I live, and one of the things that no one can answer, and it's funny thing is too, is they're all curious. It's not as if they just forget about it. Is how Jeffrey Epstein became so wealthy. I know that Apollo Capital and where Leon Black used to run, they did an internal investigation about the tax advice and things like that. Did you ever have any sense of how Jeffrey Epstein became so fantastically wealthy?
I can tell you what he told me because this wasn't part of any legal client privilege. He told me he got 1% of what he invested for Wexner. Wexner was worth $9 billion. Just do the arithmetic. 1% of that is a lot of money. And then there's the story of how he got his house on 71st Street. There are rumors that he paid $1 for it from Wexner. How he got his airplane. He also got that from Wexner. So I think Wexner is the key to a great many of these questions, as well as Lady Rothschild. She's the key. I think people have been asking the wrong people the questions and focusing, for example, on Ghislaine Maxwell. She was essentially his girlfriend and then his secretary, not nearly as involved as some of these other people. Leslie Wexner is the key. Now, we deposed Leslie Wexner in my lawsuit, and he either pretended to be senile or he was senile. I don't know which, but he couldn't answer any questions, basically. And apparently he's just bought a $37 million home on Martha's Vineyard, but I haven't seen him here at all. He's a key, and Lady Rothschild is a key to a lot of the unanswered questions, particularly about the finances.
Yeah. If he invites you over to the house, I'd advise not going, Alan. Just my own personal advice. Let's talk a bit about Israel in a broad sense. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations with people about the specifics of stuff that's been happening since October 7th. But I want to talk to you as somebody who's been an advocate for Israel in the United States, goes on university campuses and debates this stuff. Would you disagree with me if I said that I have never seen it? Israel's always had an uphill battle to wage in the United States, 1,000 times worse in Europe, where I've lived in Europe, and never gets the benefit of the doubt in Europe. But these days, I have never seen the reputation of Israel. And again, this is totally separate about whether Netanyahu should go back into Gaza City, whether there should be some sort of negotiation for hostages, or should there be a strike in Qatar on some of these remaining Hamas officials there. But just on the broader sense of Israel's reputation that I know that you've invested a lot intellectually invested a lot in over the years, have you seen it be sort of, just generically speaking, this bad? It seems that so many people don't, even friends of Israel, that don't want to talk publicly about it at the moment, and some of them have told me as such.
No, you're absolutely right. It's the exact opposite of what happened in June of 1967. I was then a young assistant professor at Harvard. Israel wins the Six-Day War, and everybody wants to be friends with Israel. Everybody wants to go to Israel. Every Jew is thumping his chest and saying, I'm a Zionist, I'm pro-Israel, because Israel was very popular around the world for winning the Six-Day War, and then everything changed. Today, this is a hard poll to believe, but it's true. Israel today is ranked as the single most hated country in the world, more than North Korea, more than Iran, more than Cuba, more than Belarus, the single most hated country in the world. So no matter what you think about Israel, you can be critical of some of its policies. The idea that this democracy, startup nation, which has contributed so much to medical technology and other technology, is ranked as the worst country in the world. Guess which are the first number one and two countries in the world? Germany and Japan, the two countries that waged the Second World War. They're the two most favorite countries in the world. And Israel, the Jews were the victims of the Second World War, is now ranked as the worst country in the world. So I'm writing a new book on this subject. And the new book is based on a Wall Street Journal article that I wrote just last Thursday called Jewish Blood's Not Cheap Anymore. And I tried to explain why Israel may have overreacted to its attack where 1,200 people were killed and 250 people were kidnapped. Because for so many years, Jewish blood has been cheap. Jews have been subject to pogroms, to attacks, and to the Holocaust. And almost nobody ever paid a price for it. And I think historically, the time had come for Jews to say, our blood's not cheap anymore. And the thesis of my book is for Israel not to care about public relations, but to do what they think is right and never to compromise their military superiority over the public relations. It's much more important for them to win the wars. It's much more important for them to do what they did with Iran, to do what they did with Hezbollah, to do what they're doing with Gaza and the Houthis, and to survive. There are enough museums commemorating dead Jews. The last thing anybody needs is another museum saying how wonderful the Jews were now that they're dead. I think it's important for Jews' enemies now to start having those museums, and for Jews to fight back and to make it clear that if you take Jewish blood, there will be very massive consequences to pay. Will that deter? We don't know. Hamas has said over and over again, we love death just the way Jews love life. And so if you kill us, we'll just come back and say, kill more of us. The more martyrs there are, the more people will join our cause. So it's very, very, very difficult. And it's very difficult. In the book, I also have a chapter, how do you fight when they're hostages? America and Britain had a very clear attitude in the Second World War. They didn't listen to the Japanese and the Germans who said, we will kill your hostages, your prisoners of war. If you attack us, the U.S. and Britain attacked Germany. And some hostages were killed. Some POWs were killed. But the difference is today, the hostages have names, they have faces, they have family members. And so it's impossible to fight a war today without taking the hostages not only into account, but putting them primary on the list of people that have to be saved. So, Israel's in a very difficult position. And the fact that so many people are turning against it says more about the people than it does about the morality of Israel.
Yeah, to your point about the Second World War, if anyone who's read Slaughterhouse-Five, the Kurt Vonnegut book, Kurt Vonnegut was in Dresden
Right.
during the firebombing of Dresden and saw that from the ground. And the RAF and the American Air Force was aware that there were prisoners there. I think one of the things that I notice with young people is that this is kind of the first TikTok war, in the sense that the Hamas has been very, very good at weaponizing images, horrifying, harrowing images, and one can never deny that. And after October 7th, the images that Hamas themselves took of the biggest slaughter of Jews since the Second World War, one had to be invited to the Israeli consulate or embassy to see those images. I was invited and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stomach it. I saw enough for one lifetime in just the stuff that was public. They've started releasing a few of those. One, actually the most horrifying thing that I have seen is the images of the children who had their father killed right in front of them. So that is a hard thing when a different set of rules when they say we don't want to exploit the death like this and re-traumatize the families and don't do so. Why do you think that it is this war? And I know that you, and I would make the argument too that there's a built-in anti-Semitism to a lot of this stuff. But 600,000 people died in the Syrian civil war, and there was not a single person on the streets
No.
of New York. And the argument, the counter argument goes, well, we fund the Israelis with weapons. We are a part of this. We were involved in the Syrian civil war in a number of ways too. But why is it the Israeli wars, and this is 2006, this is southern Lebanon, this is everything, gets the microscope when there's so many brutal wars around the world that do not?
Yeah, and you can't get any attention, for example, to the Syrians who recently massacred Kurds. You don't get anybody marching on the street, but you don't even get people marching on the street in favor of Ukrainians. They only march against Jews. And people say they're pro-Palestinian. I don't believe that for a minute. I think if the Palestinians were in exactly the same situation, but were being oppressed by Iraq or Jordan, as they were oppressed. In fact, many, many, many Palestinians were killed by Jordan. Nobody noticed. It's like Black Lives Matter. Do Black Lives matter to Black leaders? No, only if they're killed by white policemen. When Black people are killed by other Black people, it's the Weather Channel. It's page 88. You just don't get any attention to it. And so it's always a question of who's doing the killing and who's being killed. And racism is so pervasive in our society in every way. Black racism is today a very important component of what's going on, and anti-Jewish racism. And so I think if you change the components and it weren't the Jews who were allegedly oppressing the Palestinians, Palestinians would have no case. They were offered a state in 47, 48. They were offered a state in 67. They were offered a state in 2000, 2001. They were offered a state in 2007. They turned it down every time. The Kurds are so much more entitled to statehood than the Palestinians. Now, I want a Palestinian state, not because they deserve it, but because I think Israel would be better off having a divorce from Palestinians who live on the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip and let them, have their own state. But in terms of deserving, my God, is there any group less deserving of statehood than the Palestinians when you compare them to other displaced groups, when you compare them to other minorities? The Kurds are the perfect example. There are many more Kurds. They're a distinct group. They have a distinct language, a distinct culture. They want a state. They were promised a state by the Treaty of Spheres, and nobody marches for them. By the way, nobody's marching for a two-state solution either on college campuses. They want the end of Israel. They don't want to see a two-state solution. They want to see one state, and that state would be Judenrein. And so, you cannot understand this without understanding that Israel is the Jew among nations today, and they are part of the historical anti-Semitism that has plagued the world since the time of the Book of Esther and the Book of Exodus in the Bible.
We have a question from a viewer, but I want to ask you something before we get to a question. You've been doing this for a long time. Do you consider your sort of life work on this subject, when you consider you're in your 80s now, you've been doing this for a long time, you've written a series of books on the case for Israel, the case for peace, et cetera. I mean, do you consider all of that a failure, considering that you've put so much into this, and where we are now, as you point out, Israel's the least popular country globally. We're in a state that the two-state solution used to be something that people marched for. Now it's an idea of settler colonialism and eliminating the colonial state and things like that. Anti-Semitism, which I haven't seen anything like it in my lifetime on Twitter, X, whatever you call it now. Not just college campuses. I see it out in the things that politicians say. I mean, Pat Buchanan was an outlier, and Bill Buckley wrote a very good book. By the way, people should go find a thin book called "In Search of Anti-Semitism," where he went after Pat Buchanan within the movement and somebody on his own staff, a forgotten guy named Joe Sobran, who he fired for writing for other anti-Semitic magazines. But those seemed to be kind of outliers at the time. I mean, at the end of all this work, I mean, it seems like it's been a bit of a failure, I'm sorry to say.
No, I think it's been a great success. Let me tell you why. There has never been more pro-Israel activism among young people on campuses. Organizations like Chabad and Stand With Us and others have really put together an enormous number of pro-Israel activists, Christian pro-Israel activists, evangelical pro-Israel activists, Jewish pro-Israel activists. The case for Israel, although it's weaker in comparison to what it used to be, is very, very strong today on college campuses, along with the case against Israel. Imagine what the alternative would have been if there hadn't been books like The Case for Israel. Or what I've done recently is I've turned out a series of pamphlets. I'm on my fourth pamphlet. These are now being distributed free of charge at American universities. We've printed a million of these for 1,000 campuses, and you can just put it in your pocket. And it's the 10 big Israel lies and how to refute them with truth. And it's had a real impact. I have another one called, this is a cute title, Trump to Harvard, go fund yourself. Harvard to Trump, let's make a deal. So I'm going to continue to write and speak. I will never give up. I do think that Israel has won the war militarily at a great cost to its reputation. But I care less about reputation than I do about material benefits and material. Fewer Jews today, I think, will be subject to physical harm because of what I've done and what others have done on college campuses than if we had just laid down. Remember, we understand the alternative, because in the 1930s and the 1940s, Jews couldn't fight back. There were no people writing books about that. They were writing books called Jews Be Quiet, quoting Roosevelt saying Jews will only get into more trouble if they speak out. In 1991, I wrote a book called Chutzpah, which was the turning point in my life, where I said, Jews don't have enough chutzpah. We're not speaking out enough. And so I've decided to devote the rest of my life. I'm now 87 years old. I started doing this in 1991. I'm going to continue to do it as long as the good Lord gives me the power to do it, to fight back, to make it clear that Jewish blood is not cheap, that people will pay heavy costs politically, economically, morally, and physically if they continue to attack Jews. We started a new organization called Hurt a Jew, We Sue You. We're trying to fight back. Yes, we are not winning on college campuses, but we're not giving up. We have strong advocacy on college campuses that are fighting back. And I think history will show that we're on the right side. And if you're on the right side, you got to keep fighting.
We have somebody who has a question. I don't know. What's the name of our caller? Yaakov. I think I know where Yaakov is going to go with this just from his headwear. Yaakov, do you have a question for Professor Dershowitz?
Yeah, I changed my headwear. I was wearing a near Yankee thing, but I changed my headwear because Professor Dershowitz, you questioned Professor Dershowitz's advocacy, his effect for Israel. And ever since October 7th, every time I walk in New York City, I wear this hat. And I've gotten hugs and thumbs up for the past 2 years. So,
Yaakov, can I ask you a question? Have you gotten any negative reaction too?
So I'm gonna get. That's my next.
There we go.
Point.
There's the question.
There you go. So my question to Professor Dershowitz is, as a champion of free speech, you fought for the right for the KKK to march.
Right.
So the question is, do you make a difference between the Hamas mobs in New York City, which I ran into 2 times, and the vile, disgusting things that they said to me, mocking the people that are being held captives, making the sign, all of that. Do you make a difference between those mobs and the right for people to advocate for the Palestinian people? So in terms of free speech, is there a difference that you make? Because I've been...
No, I think the answer is no, because if you start restricting free speech, the first people whose free speech will be restricted will be Zionists, will be people like you and me. People will make you take your hat off. People will make me take off my button that I wear all the time for the hostages. No, free speech is essential not only to American democracy. Remember, it's essential to Jewish defense. The first thing Hitler did was quieted down the Jews. I had an interesting story. I was in Auschwitz, and I was with a German colleague, And I said to him with tears in my eyes, if I had been born 30 years earlier and my parents hadn't come to America, I'd have ended up in Auschwitz. And he said, no, you wouldn't have. You never would have made it to Auschwitz. They would have gotten you at Dachau, where they were going after the political prisoners. You never would have made it to Auschwitz because you would have stood up for the Jews even before they were being physically persecuted and eliminated. And I took that as a very high compliment that they would have gotten me at Dachau and I wouldn't have made it to Auschwitz. I'm sure that's correct. No, free speech is essential. There are limits to free speech. You can't stand in front of a Jewish synagogue with a crowd of Hamas supporters and say, burn it down, burn it down, burn it down. That's immediate incitement to violence. But you can stand in front of a synagogue and say, it would be better for the world if there were no Jews. It's a line that's a difficult one, and maybe the Supreme Court will revisit it over time. But and I want to also tell you a story about a hat. So I was invited to speak a few years ago in front of the French Assembly. And I decided, because it was France and there was so much anti-Semitism, that I would wear a kippah. I generally don't wear a kippah, a religious cap. And so I wore my kippah. And it got a lot of very positive praise from people in the audience. Next day, the chief rabbi of France calls me, and I thought he would commend me. And he said, Alan, you did a terrible thing. I said, why? He said, you wore a kippah, and that will incline and inspire others in my community to wear a kippah in the street, and they will get beaten up. He said, you're going on a plane tomorrow night back to New York City where you're going to be safe. But my French Jews, particularly my French Jews of North African background, live in communities and neighborhoods where if they wear a kippah, they'll get beaten up. So I have urged everybody in my community, the rabbi said, to wear Red Sox hats and Yankees hats, not hats with Stars of David. And so, you have to understand context. The rabbi may have been right. And I was being bold to wear a kippah, but maybe it didn't serve the interests of his community for me to do so.
Yaakov, thank you for the question. I want to add two things to that, to what Professor Dershowitz said. As far as defending free speech, remember that after Charlottesville, the ACLU ceded a lot of their moral authority on this issue and said, we'll no longer defend the rights of groups that don't kind of fit our broader worldview, which is, of course, the purpose of a free speech organization is to defend free speech that one doesn't like. It's very easy to defend the speech of, ordinary people who say ordinary things that 50, 60, 70%, even 20% of the population believes. So it took an organization like FIRE to step into the breach there. And the the E in FIRE, which was the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, has been changed to expression because they're broadening outside of the university. And one other brief thing is that there's a lot of speculation that people have made over the years about the Weimar Republic, and maybe if we had hate speech laws and anti-hate speech laws. They did have those in the Weimar Republic, and someone like Joseph Goebbels, who became the Minister of Propaganda and Enlightenment at the time in Berlin, was running a paper called Der Angriff, the attack, where he would routinely attack the chief of the Berlin police, was a guy named Bernhard Weiss, who was Jewish, and he was brought to court 1 million times for that. And it did absolutely nothing. So the free speech was essential then, it's essential now. The restrictions on speech didn't stop the Nazis. And there's an unfortunate number of other reasons that we could do an entire show about why 1933 happened and the Nazis came to power. But thank you for the question. Do we have one more? We do one more for Professor Dershowitz. This is Haley. Haley, do you have a question for Professor Dershowitz? Haley, we don't have Haley's audio.
Yeah, I got it.
You got it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. It's an honor. Thank you so much for everything you do. I am an Israeli American. I lived half my life in Israel. I also wear my dog tag every day for the hostages. I served in the IDF for 2 years, so I love Israel more than I can say. And I worry about Israel's standing in the world, not just for the safety of all Jews around the world, but for safety specifically for Israelis. And, we can go about the many attacks that have happened on soldiers just vacationing across Europe and all of the things that are happening to them. I worry that what's happening in the war, and because it's taken so long, and Israel is known for short wars and known for doing well when it's short, and the fact that it's been going on for such a long time. And I worry about the so many nuances between Hamas, and there has, the criticism that I have had of the for the Israeli government. I worry that we're losing in such a way that I don't know if we're ever going to be able to recover. And I know that you said, and it's very complicated for me because I feel what you feel. However, there's another side of me that says we need to keep our standing in the world. And I just worry that we're on a path to where we won't be able to recover from this. And I don't know. I don't know if they feel the same way. If there is, like, do we just keep going and say we don't care? And like you said, Jewish blood is not cheap. Or is there a way? Is there a bridge that we can take off and gain our and regain our standing again with the world?
Few
Thank
things
you,
that can be There are a few things that can be done. For example, I have long proposed that Hasbara, that is Israeli public relations, should be taken out of the prime minister's office and placed in the office of the president of Israel, Bougie Herzog, so that the public relations represents the entire nation of Israel, not just a particular party that's in power. That could conceivably improve the situation a little bit. But deep down, there's only one reason why Israel is today regarded as the worst country in the world, and that's because it's the nation state of the Jewish people. And if it can cure that, okay, that's fine. But it can't do it by compromising its military victories. Now, Israel would have made this war short. This would have been a 5-day war if not for the hostages. It's the fact that Hamas has taken hostages and that the world hasn't universally condemned the taking of hostages and made it into an international humanitarian issue. If there weren't hostages, Israel could have gotten to Hamas leaders almost immediately and destroyed the entire Hamas infrastructure, and the matter would be ended. But with the hostages, we don't know how many are alive. According to Trump, it's probably closer to 15 than to 20. They have become the major barrier to an effective military operation, and they're the reason why so many civilians have been killed. If Israel were able to do what other countries have done in the world, for example, clear the Gaza Strip of civilians and give every civilian an opportunity to leave, and then attack only combatants and military, that would make the war effective as well. But this is the most complicated war imaginable. And it's not like the 6-Day War, which was military against military, and Israel was able to destroy the Syrian Egyptian military in 6 days, and then the Jordanian military. And there were very few civilian casualties, and there were no hostages. But this is very, very much more complex. And so whether you agree with Netanyahu's strategy or not, you cannot have the kind of singular attack that so many people who I call BDSers, Bibi derangement syndrome people, who hate Bibi with such a passion that they're prepared to see Israel lose as long as Bibi doesn't win. That approach has made it very, very difficult. Israel is a very divided country. It's a democracy. Close to half of Israelis don't support Netanyahu and therefore don't support the way in which the war is being fought. But, even ask the hostage families, how do you fight a war with hostages? Do you just give up your military advantage and get the hostages back? Indeed, Israel just last week seemed to agree to a process that was put forward by the United States saying return all the hostages first, and then we will cease all activities militarily. We won't go into Gaza. And Hamas said no. And that's when Israel went into Qatar and tried to kill some of the Qatarian leaders. Don't underestimate the complexity. Ask yourself, what would America do under similar circumstances? And the answer is, it's very complicated. So give deference to a democracy and let them fight within their own morality, within their own democratic principles, and don't second guess them.
Thank you very much for the question, Haley. I greatly appreciate it. And I want to ask Professor Dershowitz one Final thing
Sure.
about that issue, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, I think this morning, about a call between the president and Netanyahu, in which he was, according to the journals reporting on this, was quite angry and yelling at Netanyahu. He's upbraided Netanyahu publicly in the past. It's nothing like the relationship with Obama and Netanyahu. But there seems to be some tension there, and the latest was with the strike in Qatar. Do you have any knowledge of that, talking to people in Israel, of like how that relationship between President Trump and Netanyahu is these days? Because according to the reporting, there's some difficulties.
There is some difficulty, and there's also a lot of strength. Look, if Israel had succeeded completely in eliminating all of the Hamas leadership without any civilian casualties, I think President Trump jumped on it. Great. Much as he jumped on the success that Israel had getting at the Iranian nuclear reactors. Trump loves success. He loves winners. And when Israel is a winner, he adopts it. Success has many parents. Failure is an orphan. And so when you have an operation that was only partially successful, and we don't know the extent to which it was successful or not, I think you're going to see criticism. And again, complicated. Qatar, I've spent time in Qatar. I've met with the emir of Qatar and his brother and his mother. I know the situation fairly well. Qatar plays a very complicated role. Yes, they are negotiators, but they also support Hamas and support terrorist groups. And so American relationships with Qatar is very important. And to the extent that Trump feels that Netanyahu may have damaged that without getting the benefits of destroying all of Hamas, one can understand some concerns about the relationship. But I think the relationship is strong. I know them both quite well. They have an enormous amount of similarity in the sense that they both love winning, they both want to win, and they both see things in morally clear terms. So I'm optimistic about the long-term nature of the relationship, even though I'm concerned about the day-to-day ups and downs.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, greatly appreciate you joining us. I would promote the new book that's forthcoming, but you're just writing it now. Astonishingly, 87 years old. I'm 51, and I can't put pen to paper without getting distracted. But this is the last one, the Preventative State.
Preventative State, which is my most serious book. It's a very, very analytic book about how governments are moving much more toward preventive actions. Israel is the paradigm of that, but so is the United States. And so this book was just published in the past year, so it's a new book, but it's not a pamphlet. This is a serious, but the one that's designed for the average reader. So I hope people will read it. The New York Times won't review it. They have reviewed all of my books before I defended Donald Trump. But the day I defended Donald Trump, I became an outlaw to the New York Times. They won't interview me. They won't publish. They won't review my books. If you're deemed to be somebody who defends the legal rights, the constitutional rights of Donald Trump, the New York Times is going to turn against you. So if you want to show a reaction to that, buy my book, The Preventative State, and tell the New York Times we don't care whether you review it or not.
Well, we like outlaws here on the Moynihan Report. I mean, by the way, the Irish Moynihan Report, that's the most Jewish episode ever. 2 questioners, Dershowitz. We had a fun time today. Alan Dershowitz, thank you so much. You'll see him around. I don't need to promote his stuff. He does very well. And allow him to buy pierogies, okay? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go on the internet. The man, free Alan Dershowitz's pierogies. And for the rest of you, thanks for joining us. We'll be back again on, what's today? Is today Thursday? We'll be back on Tuesday at the Moynihan Report on YouTube. You can subscribe there, look at all the videos, put comments in, yell at me, yell at Professor Dershowitz, do whatever you do. But we will see you again on next Tuesday for another episode of the Moynihan Report. I couldn't even say my name. Thanks a lot.